Let's talk a little bit about the core concept of decision making. Now, in order to make a decision, you have to have data. And of course, since future data is a little bit hard to come by, the crystal ball is not as effective as we really hoped it would be by this point. But since that doesn't exist, we have to use historic data. And what we can do is we can plot this data and we can learn from historic information and attempt to project forward and see what might be coming in the future. Of course, no data is perfect, so we have to give the data a margin of error to allow for the crazy things that happen in life. So we use that data, we plot it on a chart, and we can fairly accurately predict which way things are trending. From that, we can approximate what path we might be on. Now, curves like this, in mathematics and in real life, are plotted from strategic points along the line. Points where one curve will stop and another curve will begin. That is a strategic inflection point. Now, if you want to read some really interesting information on that, I highly recommend the book by Andrew S. Groves, Only the Paranoid Survive. This is a great book that he wrote about his time at Intel, and he dives pretty heavily into the concept of a strategic inflection point. Anyway, a strategic inflection point is where one arc ends and another one begins. But the problem with this is, as we're walking down that path, we don't really know when we've crossed over that strategic inflection point. We generally don't know that until way down the road, and often when it's too late. Now, you can use this method for all kinds of different things, from trying to figure out how a market might respond to your product or shifts that you might see in the culture. You might even use it when trying to predict your production network. Now, here's how this works in real life. You're going along and all is well in the world. Your data points are falling well within your margin of error. But then you get this. What is this? Now, it's only one data point and it only falls a little bit outside your margin of error, so probably not something to be too concerned with. But then, of course, you get the next data point, and that one falls well within the margin of error. So this confirms that your data testing is accurate and the model you're using for prediction is also good, right? But then you get this other odd point. Now, to somebody paying attention, or as Andrew S. Groves describes, the paranoid, these data points signify a bright red flag. Now, most people assume they're fine. There's probably some corruption in the data sampling, or maybe their model's a little bit off, and maybe they haven't properly accounted for shifts in the culture, or things like COVID. It's thrown off the model. So what they do is they expand the margin a little bit, and that makes them feel good. It accounts for all the little anomalies, and it says, my model is good. And we proceed on with time. Next data point might fall within the margin, might fall within the expanded margin, but it confirms that we are still on track. And then you get the next data point. Now this one falls outside of the new margin. But again, it's only one data point, so how seriously should we take this? Again, the paranoid are freaking out by this point, but most people are all cool with it. It's nothing to worry about. It's just some minor data corruption maybe. But these are bright red flags, and these are things that you really should be paying attention to. Then more time passes, and eventually you get this data point. Now this data point is really hard to ignore. It's an anomaly. It falls well outside of your expanded margins, and it screams at you that you are no longer on the path that you thought you were. Now, unfortunately for many companies, this realization comes far too late. Fortunes have been lost, and in some cases, the company is beyond the point where they can actually recover. So how do we explain this? Well, if we look at a new curve, we can see that all of the data points that we were looking at, that we thought were anomalies, actually fall well within the margin of error for a different path. Unfortunately, that moment happened way back in time, and many decisions that have been made since then were based on false pretenses. Now, if you're a great leader, and I suspect you probably are, then you have delegated many of these decision-making things to your team, which is great. when things are all stable. But we are not living in stable times. All the rules have changed, and we are now on a different path. Unless you and your team constantly talk about strategic inflection points, there's a really good chance that they're currently trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. They're adjusting their margins of errors and trying to account for why the data isn't quite working the way it used to. Now, the real problem for you, as an owner of the company or a shareholder, is accountability. Now, most of these people don't really have much at stake. Yeah, sure, if they screw up, they could lose their job, but they just move on and get another job. Meanwhile, you're left holding the financial bag. Of course, there are plenty of real-world examples. Our benchmark has been Bud Light, when Alyssa Heinerscheid decided to go for a new market and lost $1.5 billion in market, causing $27 billion, with a B, damage to the parent company and losing 4% market share. Now, those actions still echo through Bud Light today. But Bud Light is not alone in this. Jaguar recently decided to have a very strong rebrand. Misreading cues in the marketplace, they decided to put it all on the line. The result? In Europe, they've lost 97.5% of their sales year to date, and 85% worldwide. This is not just a problem, it is a catastrophe. We could completely shift gears and look at an entirely different market, like cinema. So recently, Walt Disney Corporation decided to remake Snow White as a live-action film. It cost them roughly $340 to $400 million to create, and they lost, estimates are around $240 to $300 million. By any accounts, this is a tremendous financial flop. Now, why does this keep happening over and over? Well, there are some who think it's some sort of conservative conspiracy, but I think it's more simple than that. I think it's people just are unable to read the strategic inflection points. They don't realize that we are now on an entirely different path. And that's really no surprise. We've been on this path for about 30 years now. Most of these people's entire career, and in some cases, their entire lives. That's a long run for things to be stable. But those times are gone. Now, in my market, in manufacturing, you see this manifesting in some really interesting ways. You will see people ask questions like, well, how much more can we get from our customers for making this product here in the United States? No. That is an old path question. That is something people ask when they are on the old path, in the old reality. That is before the strategic inflection point. The real question is, how are we going to survive here? How can we afford to manufacture in the United States? Because, like it or not, that is the new path. These little blips that you're seeing are not data anomalies. They're indications that things have shifted and that we are already past the strategic inflection point. Instead, you need to get ahead of this. You need to start making changes yesterday, literally yesterday. You need to start realizing you're on a different path now. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, I don't want to be first. I think this is only a trend and I think we're okay. And yeah, you might think we are on this other path, but there are a lot of people who disagree with that. There are a lot of people who know that we are on this new path. Now, let me give you some examples. Okay, so General Motors, for example, is currently investing $4 billion in U.S. manufacturing. An automotive company manufacturing here in the United States. Go figure. Of course, you've got Intel. Oh yeah, Intel. Andrew S. Groves. Billions, ongoing and continuous. And of course, you've got Tesla, who's invested billions in the U.S. and continues to do so. But those are U.S. manufacturers, so I don't know, maybe you discount that. But you've got companies like Hyundai, who've just invested $5.8 billion in the U.S. You've got TCMC, which is a $100 million investment. Oh, I'm sorry, my mistake. Both of those are in the billions. Hyundai, $5.8 billion. TSMC, $100 billion. That's on an accelerated path. You've got Roush, a German company, $50 billion. Samsung, $17 billion. Toyota, $8 billion. The trend to move manufacturing here in the United States has already happened, and companies are throwing billions of dollars behind that. You are not ahead of the curve, you're actually behind it. Those companies have already realized we're past that strategic inflection point, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. What are you doing? So this leaves you with three options. One, you could just ignore it. Say I'm wrong, don't make any investments in the United States. Hopefully Trump gets voted out. Hopefully this whole movement towards US manufacturing just dissolves. I doubt it, but it could happen. And you could gamble your company and all your employees' futures on that idea. So that's option one. Option two, you could figure it out yourself. You could realize, hey, I think we're on a different path. Let's start figuring out how to manufacture again in the United States. That is a long, hard path, and you might do okay with it. There are companies that can. Or you could listen to me. We do consulting, we do work with companies trying to reshore their manufacturing. But if you choose to go that path, I will admit that you're going to have to throw a lot of money our way. It's going to cost a lot more than you expect. Really, just like these other companies I listed, the way out is to just throw money at it. But you're buying your future. So, in my humble opinion, that's a good investment. But it's up to you. And I hope you make the right choice, and good luck. Well, that's all I've got for you today. But make sure you come back and check out the channel later because we're working on some really cool things. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get all our latest content. And remember, go out there and do something cool today.